Subsequently, happening in the 1950s time period. Marlon Matla is a 15-year-old teenager student moviegoer who hangs with his dad, Joseph Clyde Taylor, in the security room at work for the 4-Star Theatre, who enjoys guerrilla filmmaking with the surveillance video in the security room at the 4-Star Theatre, acting and modeling. He is entertaining and exciting, but can also be very sneaky and a bit mischievous. He is a Dutch Christian. He goes to Cinematic Middle School in San Francisco. Physically, Marlon is in good shape. He is average height for his age with pale skin, brown hair and grey-green eyes. He lives in a working-class neighborhood. He lives with his mother and father, an artist called Anton. Marlon's best friend is a teenager called Dennis Stevens. They are inseparable. He also hangs around with Christina Griffin and Leon Simpson. They enjoy ferret racing, Strachizikton, Kung Fu, Warrior, MMA and martial arts together. A bit about Marlon Matla's backstory is an act of kindness shown by a tragic warrior inspired to try to act likewise. Seeing a parent treated cruelly by authority figures left distrustful of similar people. His career choice was influenced by the admiration of a fortunate MMA fighter. One day, during the 1950s at the 4-Star Theatre located on Clement Street, an iconic location for the film industry that has been part of San Francisco's diverse movie culture for many generations, particularly known for also showing Asian and art films, that's right smack in the inner Richmond neighborhood that has been foreclosed. Marlon Matla, who had this fervent disciple of watching movies and guerrilla filmmaking with the surveillance video in the 4-Star Theatre's security room. Every day when the head security officer, his dad, would go off to make his rounds, Marlon would sneak off into the surveillance footage archive room and make short films out of the security video before his dad returned, then play it off as a moviegoer as he would go into theater to catch a flick. But this time it would be different, as little did Marlon know, there was a presence of a supreme being in the atmosphere with another plan in mind that would change his life and alter his destiny forever. One day Marlon encountered a presence of a supreme being that descended upon him from the muggy and humid atmosphere that he was in while film splicing separate security film reels together to form a short-length presentation on one continuous reel. Because of that, the glory of this supreme being supercharged Marlon's DNA and made it radioactive while experiencing this supernatural energy through its presence, glory, and spirit that energizes her as if he's in worship, which is called an expanded for when you are in the glory zone. Simultaneously, Marlon uncontracts, and the molecular structure of his body starts to change. His body, which is made of glory, comes in contact with a more phenomenal glory, and it changes his body's cellular structure. Marlon starts to feel lighter in the presence of Supreme Being as gravity seems to have less hold. At times, Marlon may feel so light that he thinks he will fly away because his body has changed into an expanded form. Subsequent to this, Marlon is transported from one place to another that goes beyond the screen that he is working at as he blipped into the multiverse of the cinematic universe, where Marlon discovered he had been given supernatural gifts from the Supreme Being of infinite mountain-moving psychokinesis, superpowers that energizes an action for every reaction within his viewers in the stillness of striking a pose. Marlon also has superpowers of shape-shifting his body, forecasting storms, resurrecting dead things, people to assist him, wake up nature and make it come alive to fight as an army, brewing up thunderous storms, manipulating sound, manipulating water, manipulating air, manipulating wind, manipulating fire, make the atmosphere either hot or cold, turn things, people into statues, sprucing up life energy, shape-shifting lightning, withstanding storms, superhuman strength, super sight, enhanced vision, emitting voices and creating copies of yourself through movie characters. You also have our immunity to most types of radiation and super memory. Upon flicking back to reality, Marlon is made aware that he just blipped out of film reel, and with his superpowers, He has also been given the gift of divine intuitive intercessory prayer, along with supernatural abilities to jump into any movie scene for inner guidance to obtain wisdom and knowledge. Could Marlon's day get any better than this? Oh, but it has. Since then, Marlon has developed ear-to-ear special antennas with super senses that allows easy filmmaker to characters from the cinematic multiverse communication and enhances mutual understanding. With this, Marlon also embarked on the invention of a gadget he called the Minority Report that allows him to scan any real objects and turns them into vector illustrations in computer that he could use in his guerrilla surveillance video short films. The next day at the 4-star theater, Marlon's curiosity led him to testing out one of his supernatural powers as the first thing he blurted out upon entering a movie auditorium full of people to test and see if he were the only powerful one in the room was those who believe in telekinetics, raise my hand. And so, every day Marlon takes on the love of learning to educate himself on himself through tools of the trade as he harnesses his powers through his newfound love for modeling and acting on a mass of fans through meditation. Eventually, Marlon finds he is able to do more than he could think, ask, or imagine through the power of creative imagination and have a significant impact on people. One day while an entertainment news magazine was reporting at a premiere for a newly released movie, as photojournalist took fondly to Marlon and asked him to be in a photo shoot, and subsequent to this he found himself like a fly on the wall in front of a premiering movie poster while a mugger out of his peripheral vision pickpocketing in the lobby. Because of that, Marlon detected an unseen force in his super senses that remains invisible to the naked eye that made him dawn upon a shocking revelation of how the bad spirits that influence people are like playing tennis but your opponent is underwater, and you cannot see them. It is hidden like sharks in the ocean, and they bite. Because of that, Marlon hit the right note to not see muggers as a problem but an opportunity and influence them to significance with his fans, and so began a new journey on a course that took a toil in changing his direction for justice and mercy. Until finally, Marlon embarked on an idea of putting together a street team brigade of fans to help get his image out there to make a difference in the world of crime for making critical life decisions without his presence. Later, after Marlon walked out of the security room at the 4-star theater, he gets an insight to jump into this film and accordingly jumped in a scene with his favorite actor. Upon flicking back to reality, Marlon has a run-in with Joel Flickstein just as he is coming out of celluloid skin and returning from a suicide mission. It is then when Marlon first meets Joel Flickstein for some small talk, who took Marlon under his wings as his cinematic protege and sidekick along with Reels, Diamondiferous, and Flickster. Now, every day Marlon would see Joel Flickstein and be movie mentored with Ayrton, Corey, and Skylar. After, Marlon either goes to jump into a movie, make a guerrilla surveillance short film, or use his power of modeling to change a mugger's mind for good. At the end of the day, Marlon discovered that there's power in his name, being that MOVIEOLA refers to the source of his power and his powers were inherited by a deity. Aside from that, when Marlon's parents found out about his superpowers, it forced them to open up to Marlon and tell him about the secret that's been safe with them, as his mum explained how she was a deity, and his dad explained how he was a chthonic being living undercover for the reason of being wanted by the FBI. This explained more of why Marlon received his superpowers during the film's splicing incident with the presence of the Supreme Being, and when the untold about procedure involving a mutant film badge worked better than expected in his adolescence, as he was exposed to a strange chemical found in a film badge while studying an alien planet that it had evolved from, and what happened then was just preparation for what happened in the now. So in Marlon's excitement he had a restless night, staying up all night to make a superhero costume looks like a ninja-influenced military-inspired futuristic athletic outfit designed in white, silver, and turquoise. He has a black zigzag on his face. His emblem is displayed on his shoulders and belt buckle. It also includes a retractable acoustic guitar disguised as a blaster neutralizer, that is an electro-biomechanical neural transmitting zero synapse repositioner that is a top secret device. It has the ability to wipe the mind of anybody who sees the flash, as its eureka phaser generates a creativity beam. The hit person gets an aha moment with the strum of a chord. Used on stuck collaborators or yourself. Not only that, but also a global positioning device in the belt, and a pair of gauntlets. It also includes several technological and period accessories, timepieces, parasols, flying, driving goggles, daggers and 2 retractable samurai swords. It can camouflage itself to give him the power of invisibility and invincibility. It is waterproof, fireproof, heat-resistant, bulletproof, and gives him the power to endure any kind of harsh weather condition. Not to mention, it stretches to accommodate anyone who wishes to wear it. It also includes a nose and mouth face mask, and inertial dampers. The following day, when Marlon returned to the 4-star theater, he was ecstatic to share his suit and tell what he had discovered to the gang subsequent to being recruited as MOVIEOLA to join Celluloid, Reels, Diamondiferous and Fixter in their work with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases together. Accordingly, they fought crime, when not being mentored, making guerrilla security video short films, or movie jumping. Thereafter. And so, the Flix texting stories of the one in these 5 movie journeys begins. The following morning, as Joel was opening the movie theater, starting projectors and opens shutters to project images onto screens, he received this intuition to throw up an horizon for the one person who attempts suicide every 38 seconds to be saved and changed into celluloid to make intervention for them. Simultaneously, Eaton would be off in the cinematic alternative school as Reels, then it's off to work with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Skylar would be scoping out the popular 1950s movies that were in showing at the 4-star theater. All the while, Corey would be playing pinball in the olden day game room, and Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called 7 Samurai and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds, then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as MOVIEOLA through his powers of modeling through effigies. When Joel returned, he would be coordinating equipment operation with presentation of supplemental material, such as music, oral commentaries, and then sound effects. Until Joel gets an intuition to save suicidal and springs up into celluloid, while at the same moment in the cinematics school, Skylar as Diamondiferous would be off in her movie class in cinematic alternative school. Eaton as Reels would be kicking butt and taking names in standing up for the little people in the world. Corey would be playing pinball in the olden day game room until the next movie showing to see the 1950s movie and jumping into it accordingly as Flixster, then go to work with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Simultaneously, Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called Throne of Blood and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds, then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as MOVIEOLA through his powers of modeling through effigies. Moving on to fulfill his next duty after being back, Joel operates special effects equipment, such as stereopticons, to project pictures onto screens until an intuition interrupts and he springs up into celluloid to save another from suicide. While at the same moment in the cinematics school, Corey as Flixter was off in his movie class in cinematic alternative school. Skylar was in the skin of Diamondiferous, working with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Subsequent to Eaton would be kicking butt and taking names in standing up for the little people in the world as Reels. Simultaneously, Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called Throne of Blood and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds, then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as Moviola through his powers of modeling through effigies. When celluloid flicks back into the 4-star theater as Joel is next duty of preparing film inspection reports, attendance sheets, and logbooks until another intuition interrupts for him to spring up into celluloid and save another person from suicide. While at the same moment in the cinematics school, Skylar as Diamond Differus was off in her movie class in cinematic alternative school. Eaton would be working with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Corey being in the olden day arcade room, playing video games until another movie would show. Then he would be off into another theater to see the 1950s movie subsequent to kicking butt and taking names in Standing Up for the Little People in the World accordingly as Flickster. Simultaneously, Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called Rebel without a cause done, inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds. Then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as Moviola through his powers of modeling through effigies. When Joel Flickstein is done with his last task, after jumping out of celluloid's skin of course and into his own skin, he would be found setting up and inspect curtain and screen controls until another intuition calls and he springs up into celluloid again to save another suicidal. While at the same moment in the cinematics school, Corey as Flickster was off in his movie class in cinematic alternative school. After that he was in the olden day arcade room to play some video games. Skylar as Diamond Differus was working with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Eaton as Reels kicking butt and taking names in Standing Up for the Little People in the World until another movie would show. Then it's off to relax in the theater. Simultaneously, Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called The Day the Earth Stood Still and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds. Then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as Moviola through his powers of modeling through effigies. Joel arranges schedules for theater facilities upon return, as at the same time movie quotes are flooding the thoughts of Skylar as Diamond Differus while off in her movie class at her cinematics school. Whereas, Eaton would be working with the law enforcement to assist them on arduous unsolved cases. Upon Joel's return from his heroic suicidal mission and just when he thinks he can rest from the intuitions and saving suicidals, he gets another one in a flash that causes him to spring up into celluloid to make intervention again. Meanwhile, Corey would be kicking butt and taking names in Standing Up for the Little People in the World as Flickster, then in the arcade room in his own skin, playing video games until another movie would show and off to another theater to see the 1950s movie, as he jumps into it accordingly. Simultaneously, Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called Forbidden Planet and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds. Then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as Moviola through his powers of modeling through effigies. On the clock again. When Joel returns to work, he hangs up his celluloid suit and fulfills the task of removing film splicing in order to prepare films for shipment after showings, and return films to their sources. After that Joel clocks out to take a lunch as Flickster and Reels would be flicking back into reality to join him and Skylar. Marlon would laggardly meet up with them in the employees' quarters, where they all would sit down together and talk with food in their mouth over a lunchbox and juice box. Joel returned to work 30 minutes after. Eaton Cinematic School shortly. Skylar, watching movie for an escape. Corey, venturing into the arcade room to play video games. Marlon would be in the security room stealthily film splicing a film called To Catch a Thief and inserting it with surveillance footage into a reel together to form a feature-length presentation on one continuous reel until his dad returns from making his rounds. Then he quickly jumps into a movie to play in off. Thereafter he would bust muggers suited up as Moviola through his powers of modeling through effigies. Now Joel is utilizing the equipment required to rewind films and operates special effects equipment. He proceeds to close the facilities according to rules and schedules. Upon closing the theater, Joel would hang around the projectionist booth for Marlon, Eaton, Skylar and Corey to finish doing their daily activities so they can say goodnight to each other before departing their own separate ways. Thus, Skylar and Corey time-traveled back to their future. Eaton went to his broom closet in the 4-star theater to call it a night. Marlon suspiciously rode with his conniving dad home. Joel wheeled himself home. However, while Joel wheels himself home in his wheelchair, a security vehicle peeled out in front of him to an abrupt halt. He just has had a run-in with black hair, brown eyes, 138 pounds, 5 feet 8 inches Native American who has tattoos on his left wrist, right forearm, and both hands. This man goes by the name of Joseph Clyde Taylor, whose last name has been changed from Matla, and is seen with Marlon, who his dad, and also known by the FB as the most wanted fugitive. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Phoenix Field Office, Pintop Lakeside Resident Agency, along with the White Mountain Apache Tribe Police Department, are seeking the public's assistance in identifying the unknown individuals responsible for the murder of Joseph Clyde Taylor in White River, Arizona, in August of 1949. Right there and then, Joel pulls out his cell phone in preparation for the worst to jump Joseph Clyde Taylor and himself into a film, but Marlon has already beat him to it as soon as they both have stepped outside the security truck. He, along with Joseph Clyde Taylor and Marlon, get jumped into the Invisible Invaders movie that tells a sci-fi/horror story about when Dr. Carl Neumann is killed in an explosion. Aliens inhabit his corpse and use it to communicate with his previous colleague, Drive, Adam Penner, revealing to him that invisible aliens live on the moon. After this revelation, the aliens set out to wipe out humanity by making zombies from their corpses. To survive, Dr. Penner, his daughter, Dr. John Lamont and Major Bruce J. all hide in a bunker. Subsequently, the scene that Marlon has jumped them into does more than cause a heart change and rewrites the perp's story to prevent a terrible mistake. And so, the next day, as Joel was opening the movie theater and starting everything up, Marlon struts out of the security room of the 4-star theater with a smirk on his face as he walks in and out of each theater in search for Joel. When Marlon finds Joel, he walks up to him with an Glitches Gazette newspaper in hand and blurts out for him to read it. Joel reads the headline to himself: "Dead Fugitive Walking Surrenders." He continues to read. On August 5, 1949, Taylor was stabbed in White River around 5:45 p.m. Emergency medical services responded and transported Taylor to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead, and it an unsolved mystery without a suspect found. Or so we thought after Joseph Clyde Taylor, or the alien who inhabited his body, surrendered for him. Joel takes the newspaper from Marlon's hands to find that a character in Invisible Invaders movie has caused this for Joseph Clyde Taylor. Joel sat pondering over the perplexity, saying, "How in the world is this possible? I thought only stuff like this happened in the movies." Marlon looks at Joel, shaking his head as he says, "You adults just don't get it. Some movies are so powerful they become real. As a couple of years ago my dad, Joseph Clyde Matla or Clyde, became a homicide victim prior to Earth being warned of mass attack from space, but what they didn't see is we've been fighting not against flesh and blood but against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. I should have known that from reading the Bible," muttered Joel upon interruption. In my spare time I've been making an experimental film with surveillance footage and other films from this time period to birth Invisible Invaders film that was used to bring about a solution pertaining to my dad. And what do you know, it worked," said Marlon. There and then, Skylar and Corey come flashing in from their time warp. Corey asks, "What are you twiddle-poopy-lirapoops up to?" "Yeah, what's the news in your hand?" Skylar asked. Skylar and Corey peer at the newspaper to read the headline. "What?" exclaimed Corey and Skylar. "Oh, just a fugitive who has surrounded," Marlon responded. "Who happens to be a dead man walking and his dad that he has been living with," Joel responded. Joel holds up the newspaper to show Skylar and Court the headline. They gawks at it, and snatch it from his hand to read the rest of it. Skylar responds, "You gotta be kidding me." "Nope, he's not. It says it right there," responded Corey. Corey points out a column on the newspaper with his finger, and together they look over it. Promptly, there's a flash of light that emits from the entrance of the restroom and Eaton walks out zombie-like. He approaches Joel, Marlon, Corey, and Skylar. Eaton snarled a few choice remarks at them. "Oh, crud," Marlon blurted. Skylar, Corey, and Joel all look up abruptly. "Who got to him?" Marlon remarked. "Marlon, you don't know what you were doing when you experimented with that film," Joel shouted. Skylar and Corey both look at each other in hesitation and scared stiff, unsure of what to say as zombie-like Eaton staggered on his heave feet, swaying while drawing near. "Sure I do. Quick! Every jump into this Invisible Invaders film right here to see the solution, and let's go snag the device used to defeat the aliens that inhabit humans as zombies," Marlon exclaimed. Marlon turns away, opening a wormhole to the film and jumps inside as Skylar, Joel and Corey quickly follows him while Eaton drags his feet zombie-like after them only to snatch at air upon them disappearing into the wormhole. Subsequently, there's chuckling as he says under his breath, "Psych." Then, Eaton turns around and dismissively shrugged it with a smirk. He normally walks off into a theater. The end. At least. For now.